Good morning, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all participants who are with us here today. This technical seminar is about blue forests and poverty, the role of blue forests in international development, from food security to climate change. And a warm welcome to everybody who's viewing digitally. And happy International Women's Day. My name is Gabriella Kosman. I'm a senior advisor at the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, and I will be one of the moderators here today. And with me, I have Peter and Cecilia. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Peter Haugen, and I'm a program director at Institute of Marine Research, responsible for global development there.
And my name is Cecilia Vatne, and I lead the Norwegian Blue Forest Network.
The United Nations theme for 2022 on the International Women's Day is gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow, recognizing how women around the world are responding to climate change. Women and girls experience the greatest impacts of climate crisis, increases also in existing gender inequalities, and puts women's lives and livelihoods at risk. Across the world, women depend more on, yet have less access to, natural resources, and often bear a disproportionate responsibility for securing food, water, and fuel. The role of women on the use, management, and protection of blue forests, our coastal and coastal ecosystems, has always been known, but never well documented. Globally, 1/3 of working women are in agriculture, forestry, and fishing. The ecosystems in blue forests contribute to small-scale fisheries, as over half the seafood catch in developing countries is from small-scale fisheries, and that 90% of that catch is for local consumption. This demonstrates the high value of these ecosystems in alleviating poverty.
Yeah, in the sixth assessment report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, the benefits of blue forests and coastal ecosystems are highlighted in many areas. Some of them being supporting fisheries and biodiversity, providing ecotourism, sustaining livelihoods and contributing to the blue economy. Also, the report highlights the benefits of blue forests and coastal ecosystems as mitigation measures, as nature-based solutions, how they give coastal protection and are crucial in reducing risks of climate change. So today we will discuss opportunities and dilemmas when it comes to everything from harvesting more food from the ocean to delving into the growing blue carbon market.
We will hear from experts with the Norwegian Blue Forest Network, which is a network comprised of 3 leading Norwegian organizations with expertise within blue forest: Grid Arendal, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, and the Norwegian Institute for Marine Research. In addition, we'll also hear from researchers and actors from a range of areas, such as partner countries, FAO, and the World Bank.
We will have 2 discussions to each session, starting with a session on blue forests and food security, and then after the coffee break, blue forest and climate change. Slido is the tool to ask questions on, both for the studio here and for the ones following us on screen. And please make sure to address the questions to one of the speakers in the panels. As we have limited time today and have a lot of contributors to the discussions, perhaps time will not allow us to follow up on all the questions. However, we will try to respond to all. And please also take the opportunity in the coffee break to talk with the presenters here today and the contributors. So with that, let's get started. I will now have a video. This first thing we start with, it's called What Are Blue Forests? So this video will describe that blue forests are a common name for vegetation in the ocean and tidal zones. It will describe mangroves, kelp, rockweed, seagrass, and saltmarshes. So let us watch the video.
Blue forests are a common name for vegetation in the ocean and tidal zones, such as kelp, rockweed, seagrass, saltmarshes, and mangroves. Mangroves are trees and shrubs that grow in saline or brackish waters. They are found along tropical and subtropical coasts around the world. In Norway, kelp forests are the most widely distributed blue forest, followed by rockweed and seagrass. There is limited knowledge on the distribution of salt marshes in Norway, but they are likely found all along the Norwegian coast. Kelp species are large brown seaweeds that grow in rocky habitats in most temperate and polar coastal areas, where sunlight is accessible for photosynthesis. Tangle kelp and sugar kelp are by far the most common species in Norway. Like kelp, rockweed is also a brown seaweed. However, rockweed grows in the shallow intertidal zone and is usually smaller than kelp. They are typically visible from the shore. In Norway, all seagrass species belong to the eelgrass family, which grows on the soft seabed in sheltered bays. Salt marshes are coastal wetlands that are flooded and drained by tidal water. They are comprised of a variety of species that tolerate high salinities and appear to be very diverse. Overall, blue forests are marine and coastal habitats that constitute some of the most diverse ecosystems in the world.
As the video informs us, the blue forests are marine and coastal habitats that constitute some of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. During today's seminar, we will take a closer look to what that means. In session 1, we will hear about the big picture, how blue forests are vulnerable. We will also hear about the importance of gender equality to food security, linkages between fisheries and blue forests, opportunities and concerns to seaweed farming. And hear also about different types of choices that can be made and how some might not be more, some might be a bit more sustainable than others. So, to begin, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Solrun Figenschou Kjellum. Solrun is a research director for sustainable societal development at the Norwegian Institute of Water Research. Solrun has a special focus on climate change issues, as well as policy relevance. She has over 20 years of climate and environment experience from the research, public and private sector. And she worked with blue forest issues for the last 10 years. Solrun will talk about why are healthy blue forests so important. Please welcome Solrun to the stage.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those who are in a different time zone. It is a real pleasure to be here today. I will try to give you a bit of an overview of blue forests and a couple of teasers about blue forests. But I will start by saying this. Blue forests are quite similar ecosystems in the sense that they're all in the coastal zone and they have some similar ecosystem services. But it is important to note that they're actually also quite different. And why does that matter? It matters because what's true for some types of blue forest can be false for others. So for management purposes, it's important to know the difference. And you will hear about this today. And another obvious thing for different types of ecosystems is that they thrive in different types of conditions. So we don't find them in the same places in the world. And this thing does not work. Perfect, thank you. In the map that you see behind me, you will see that green, black, and blue and yellow are different types of blue forests. And the most striking thing about this picture is that you find blue forests in almost all coastal countries in the world. And in some of the countries, you find several types of blue forests. And the most abundant color in this picture is yellow, which are the seagrasses. And you actually find them in over 150 countries in the world. But if you follow the green color, you see that sort of moves to the north and to the south. That's kelp, which thrives in colder and nutrient-rich waters. So you don't typically find them in the tropics or the subtropics. But that's where you find the mangroves, which thrive in warmer waters. And then the salt marshes are blue, and they're a little bit here and there and everywhere, but we lack a lot of data for salt marshes. But one important thing to note, perhaps, is that the ecosystems that thrive at home and that we know a lot about in Norway, like kelp, aren't found in least developed countries. They're found in some of the middle-income countries like Namibia, South Africa, and China. Last week, the environment ministers of the world met in Nairobi for UNEA 5. And they talked about the triple planetary crisis: pollution, biodiversity, and climate change. And blue forests are at the heart of all of these crises. They are threatened by pollution, even by plastics, which was key at UNEA. They're threatened by climate change, and they are in global decline. And the kelp that you see here on the left is almost overgrown by turf algae, which have been able to take control, so to say, due to climate change and pollution. But blue forests are also win-win-win solutions for the triple crisis. We heard earlier on that there are lots of species in the blue forest, large to small, on land and in the water. Some of them are important for commercial fisheries, some for artisanal fisheries, and you even find red-listed species like the Bengal tiger in the Asian mangroves. And in terms of climate change, they are carbon sinks. They can also sort of buffer the effects of the rising sea level and reduce erosions along the coast. And also, you can take some of this blue forest and produce products that can replace products with high emissions. You can produce biofuels. You can also replace soy in animal feed, and you can even feed kelp and rockweed to cows to reduce the methane emissions from these animals. And finally, they can improve water quality. And even more importantly, I'm going to come back to plastics because a lot of people don't think about plastics when they think about blue forests. Later research actually proves, or at least points to, that seagrass can capture microplastics and eject it out of the water. And in many countries, there are new and innovative companies that are producing biodegradable plastics from kelp. There's one company in the UK that has started producing biodegradable sachets for the takeaway industry, for ketchup, sauces, etc. And in Norway, there's a company that's looking at producing edible straws and food packaging. So there's a lot going on, but in order to harvest all of this, we need to protect, sustainably manage, and restore these systems. But these three crises are not the only crises in the world. Today we're going to talk about food. 800 people go hungry to bed every day. Food prices are on the rise due to the COVID crisis and the war in Ukraine. And blue forests play a role in this picture as well, but this is a much more complex role. Salt marshes are often converted to agricultural land. Mangroves are converted to aquaculture ponds to produce food. But on the bright side, these are home to fish and shellfish, and many of the blue forests, or at least some of them, are also edible, and some of the kelp species have been eaten for over 10,000 years. And you can also produce several edible products from blue forests, and we're seeing a large increase in that now. Today's topic is also poverty. Poverty increased for the first time in over 20 years, again due to COVID, climate change, and conflict. And blue forests can have a role here as well. It can be the source of income for smaller communities and for large companies. And in the western part of the world, we're seeing an industrial production and farming of, in particular, kelp and other types of blue forests. But in the developing world, it can be important for communities as well. And we're also seeing a bit of farming there as well. Some of the products that we can get and generate income from in terms of blue forests: fish and shellfish, we heard about that already. Other edible products. In Norway, you can buy spaghetti, you can buy beer, you can buy liquor, you can buy chocolate, and many other products that contain some sort of blue forest. But we also talked about animal feed. You can already feed it to cattle, and some of our researchers are looking at this being the future for fish feed, for example. Hair and skin products are, believe it or not, also possible to make from blue forest. The last time I went to the hairdresser, there was a full wall of stevia. I'd never seen that before, but this is coming fast. Textiles and handicraft are also important. Medicinal products are important. Plastics are important. And today we will also hear about the opportunities from ecotourism, and maybe carbon credits can also be an income, and we'll hear about the pros and cons of that as well. But the pictures that you see here today, they're all from, well, not Europe, let's put it like that. The first picture to the upper left, that's mangrove honey and mangrove shampoo, conditioners, soap, body lotion, that's produced in Thailand by primarily a group of women in a community. The next one, the green basket, is produced in Vietnam from dried seaweed, from dried seagrass, also by a group of women. The one at the bottom left is another type of mangrove honey. This one's from Bangladesh. And the one at the lower bottom to the right is South African fertilizer made from kelp. So there is a lot of things going on. And because these systems have so many ecosystem services, contribute to many of the SDGs. I put some of them up here. We don't really have time to properly through all of them. Climate action, clean water, life below water, etc. We could have also added life on land, which people tend to forget, and also 17, which is about cooperation, because if you're going to manage these systems well, perhaps new people need to cooperate, people that haven't worked together before. And finally, I'm going to talk about cooperation on the global arena, because blue forests are gaining growing attention on the global arena. To the left, you see the logo for COP26, that was in Glasgow. And in the Glasgow Climate Pact, marine ecosystems recognized carbon sinks for the very first time. There was also a very increased focus on ocean mitigation, and moving forward, there will be an ocean dialogue in connection with the convention. Also, there's quite a few countries that put blue forest in their NDCs. We'll hear more about that later. But the Glasgow Climate Pact also made it possible to report on blue carbon. Now, that's been done before, but the way it's been done now sort of strengthened the opportunity to do just that. So it's a bit of a breakthrough. And again, in UNEA, there was a definition for nature-based solution. It hasn't really come out yet, but it seems to be about the actions to protect, manage, and restore systems that have a high societal value, precisely like the blue forest. And nature-based solutions will also be a topic in the second part of the negotiations for the new nature agreement. That's going to happen in the third quarter of this year. So it's a completely different picture. And I will just say this as a final note. The network has existed for about 10 years. It's sort of been like a steady and not so changing interest. But over the last year, there's been a really rapid increase in the interest in blue forests, and it's really a pleasure to see, and that you have, so many of you are here today. So I hope you have a wonderful day and learn a lot about blue forests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Solrun. Solrun gave us an overview of the big picture and why blue forests are vulnerable. We will come back to this later during the panel. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Harrison Charukarisa. Harrison is a senior fisheries specialist for fisheries and aquaculture with the World Bank Group and part of the Pro-Blue Secretariat. He has worked with several organizations in aquaculture and fisheries development as a scientist, manager, and researcher. He has earlier been with World Fish, the State Department of Fisheries and the Blue Economy in Kenya, and also the Kenyan Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. Harrison will talk about gender in blue forests, a pro-blue perspective. Let's listen to Harrison's message here today.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harrison Charukarisa. I work for the World Bank in the Pro-Blue Secretariat. Here today, I'm going to talk about gender in blue forests, a pro-blue perspective. Blue forests, as you know, play a crucial role for coastal communities as nursery habitats for fish and other aquatic organisms. They also serve as food sources while providing several other ecosystem services. Coastal communities are inhabited by around 37% of the global population. The ability for us to sustain these livelihoods depend on our ability to stop degradation and ensure that these resources are used for the benefit of the people. Many of these resources, be it fish, crabs, shellfish, and so on, including seagrasses, are important for these communities, and they need to be kept as such. As we celebrate Women's Day today, we put our spotlight on women that have made a difference in utilization of resources within the blue forest. Mama Fatuma, whom you can see here, from Kibuyuni in Kenya, a few years ago could not make ends meet. Sleeping hungry was a normal thing, and our children were not able to go to school because of poverty. Overfishing, habitat degradation, and other ills had made fewer and fewer marine resources available, including fish. 47% of women, like Mama Fatuma, are workers in fishing industry. 90% of these women work in secondary marine-related activities, such as fish processing and marketing. Their fate is, of course, completely tied to what happens on the fisheries. But today, Mama Fatuma and her colleagues are no longer in that particular situation because they discovered mwani, which is seaweed in Swahili, and they have been able to produce and value add to to these products so that they can make juices, soaps, and shampoos, which they sell for more money, kicking out poverty completely. Another group that has benefited in equal manner is what we call Mikoko Pamoja, which is not far away from Kibuyuni, where Mama Fatuma stays. These have been able to sell carbon credits because they have been doing reforestation programs that have brought back much of the forest. And this not only serves them with money and livelihoods, but also they help to conserve the environment in which Mama Fatuma and others would get their benefits. Many other countries have been able to experience the same things, as far as Madagascar, Zanzibar, Philippines, and so on, who have been able to use crop fattening and other ideals, including cucumber farming, from the land to be able to make ends meet. ProBlue is a trust fund at the World Bank that brings together several donors to support the development of integrated, sustainable, and healthy marine and coastal resources. We do this under 4 pillars. One is on fisheries governance. The second one is on management of marine pollution. The other one is focusing on key sectors such as tourism, maritime transport, and offshore renewable energy. And the last pillar is on integrated seascape approaches. ProBlue activities interweave across several cross-cutting themes, including gender, poverty, climate change, and so on. And we ensure that we maximize the finance for development. To increase equity between men and women, ProBlue supports programs that focus on training and capacity building, that ensure gender data is collected and analyzed for management. Our marine spatial planning and co-management includes ensuring that all women and other segments of the communities participate fully, including the participation of marginalized and indigenous communities. It is such programs that bring the desired outcomes of healthy oceans, healthy economies, and healthy communities. Our rallying call at ProBlue is that our efforts matter and that we can bring change that will not only be useful for now, but we shall be sustainable on the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harrison, for providing examples from Kenya, illustrating how women in Fatuma's group moved from depending on processing and marketing of fish, which was challenged by a lack of sufficient quantities, into seaweed farming, processing, and marketing. Let us now move on to the next speaker, who will go further into the gender aspects. I have the pleasure of introducing Tanya Bryan. She was supposed to be here in person, but she fell ill, unfortunately. But she's with us on screen. Tanya is a senior program officer at Grid Arendal and has extensive international experience in marine ecosystem services, ocean governance, and community-focused approaches to ocean management. In her work, she promotes peer-to-peer learning and local capacity development. She also has a long-lasting positive sort of gender role in Grid Arendal. That was a little bit weird. I wasn't going to say positive, but yeah, sorry about that. Tanya will be joining us now, giving a presentation, and then later in the panel discussion. She will give a talk about healthy blue forest, a closer look at food security projects across the globe. Let's listen to Tanya's message.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya Bryan, and I'm a Senior Program Officer for Grid Arendal. I would like to speak with you today about how healthy blue forest ecosystems can and do contribute positively to creating more food-secure communities around the globe. As we've just heard in the previous talk, blue forests can help alleviate poverty through providing different sources of economic benefits. These ecosystems can also provide different food sources. Now, most often when we think about food security in marine ecosystems, we think about finfish fisheries. All blue forests that we're talking about today contribute to these type of commercial fisheries. most often by providing nursery habitats, shelter, food. But for my talk today, I would like to go beyond fin fisheries to look at other aspects of food security that blue forests support. As we've heard already, today is International Women's Day. And when we look at blue forests, we begin to see that women disproportionately use and benefit from healthy blue forest ecosystems. I borrowed this slide from a presentation given by the Wildlife Conservation Society entitled Revealing the Contributions of Indigenous Fisherwomen to Food Security and Livelihoods in Fiji at a UNEP conference on gender and coastal ecosystems last October. I was so taken by it as it so clearly shows what we're looking at today: blue forest ecosystems and who use them. In this case, you can see that key blue forest ecosystems, mangroves and seagrasses in this case, are primarily used by women. And so if these ecosystems become degraded or are not sustainably managed, it's women who are most at risk. In this same study, when asked to choose just one main reason for fishing, 83% of the women interviewed said they fish to feed their families, while only 14% said that income generation was the primary reason. So you can see why women are so reliant on healthy blue forest ecosystems. If we move now to looking at the specific blue forest ecosystems, mangroves are one of the most well-known blue forests. These were the first ecosystems to really be recognized for their carbon sequestration. In terms of food security, mangrove ecosystems provide a wide range of food options, including crabs, oysters, fish, and honey. They are also used as fuel for cooking and smoking fish. A key case study that shows the value of mangroves towards food security can be found in Ecuador. The project was supported by the Jeff Blue Forest Project. The focus of this project was in part carbon, but also looking at valuing other external benefits that could be provided by protecting over 67,000 hectares of mangroves. As you can see, over 21,000 livelihoods were supported and several artisanal fisheries, including red crab and black cockles, benefited. Based on this, in 2017, a small all-women fishing group was established to help empower local women and to provide them with diverse economic benefits. As well, during the COVID pandemic, based on the strength of their healthy mangrove ecosystems, this and other fishing associations were central in helping communities ensure that they remain food secure by improving access to markets, as well as setting up alternative markets, such as bartering, when lockdown was in effect. Moving to seagrasses, these are less well studied than mangroves, but they also do have a strong role in both carbon sequestration as well as in food security issues. Seagrass play a strong role in many different life stages of valuable fish species. Most commonly, most fish use these beds as nursery habitats to keep juveniles safe from predators. In terms of other food benefits, one of the nicest examples comes from Joal Fadouth in Senegal. Here, arc clams are fundamental for the local economy as an income-generating venture. Seagrass meadows are essential for arc clams in that seagrass play an important role in improving water quality. This is essential for the arc clam fishery and for food security in Joal Fadouth as a whole. The revenue generated from the arc clams help cover households' expenses as well as allowing families to pay for school fees. Locally, they love to tell the story of the first president of Senegal, who was a native of Joal Fadouth, and how he could trace his education back to revenue generated by women collecting seashells. The last blue forest ecosystem is one we'll hear more about later today, so I won't spend too much time on kelp and seaweeds. There's a lot of knowledge around how kelp and seaweeds are used directly as food sources, both locally and commercially. In Chile, they've been incorporating seaweeds in their diet for over 500 years, and they have an amazing array of recipes that are used by families in most coastal communities, and they're even promoted by top chefs in high-end restaurants. In Chile, they're also farming kelp and seaweed as a source of alginate to sell on the commercial market. So in this region, there's a historical reference for using this blue forest ecosystem as subsistence food. But this isn't the case in all regions, so its value as a food source will vary depending on cultural and historical use. Much of what I've been talking about today would be referred to as small-scale fisheries, and women are predominantly represented in these types of fisheries. Some of the statistics I have found include 2.1 million women participate in small-scale fisheries. They caught almost 3 million tons of fish and invertebrates with a total value of $5.6 billion US dollars. But really, this is probably an underrepresentation. There's a noticeable lack of accurate, visible, and accessible information on women in the fisheries sector. This can be due to a lack of gender-segregated statistics. It can also be a result of women tending to contribute to the informal economy, which is often unrecorded. As I said earlier, women tend to primarily fish to feed their families, which is often missing from official statistics. All of this reduces our ability to sustainably manage blue forest ecosystems. If we don't have a complete holistic picture of who is using them, how much, and when, it will be extremely difficult to create accurate management plans. So in conclusion, healthy blue forests are essential for communities around the globe, especially for food security. Women's unique needs and perspectives are not routinely incorporated into fisheries management and policy decisions, thus contributing to an underestimation of fishing pressure in coastal regions. In general, there's an undervaluing of the economic and societal benefits provided by women fishers that can then lead to further marginalizing their work and contributions. Going forward, we need to work on normalizing engagements with women's groups right from the beginning of our project developments and have them recognized and valued at the same level as other stakeholder groups we engage with. Thank you. Following on my presentation, I would like to introduce a video on women's group in Kenya. While more specifically related to ecotourism, there is a number of economic benefits that arise from this project that help ensure that the community is food secure. This is a video on Gazi Women Boardwalk, empowering women through mangrove ecotourism.
In Gazi Bay, Kenya, local women have constructed and maintained a mangrove boardwalk which has attracted many visitors to experience and learn about the unique flora, fauna, and history that can be found there. The boardwalk is 450 meters long and managed by an association of 27 women.
I'm the secretary of the Gazi Women Mangrove Boardwalk. This is a project of mangrove ecotourism. We are doing ecotourism through the boardwalk, and different visitors come to see the species of mangrove, and we do catering for visitors. We plant mangrove and conserve at the same time. We do apiculture, keeping bees for honey. Then we sell the handcrafts.
The project has received international support from the City Council of Overijssel in Belgium and the Global Environment Facility via the United Nations Development Programme, among others. The boardwalk serves as the ecotourism unit for the Makoko Pamoja Community Organization, which manages the carbon offsetting revenue from a local mangrove conservation and restoration project. The boardwalk promotes conservation education within the mangrove forest. It offers a serene public space for the local community while also bringing in revenue from tourists.
The activity we have is taking the visitors along the boat. First, we show them the different species of mangrove. As you can see, there are some visitors who would like to have lunch, but there are some who are not interested. So they just come and enjoy themselves, the breeze from the Nile. There are some even, there are some visitors who are ready to learn and to know more about mangrove, but there are some who come just for pleasure.
Through this initiative, the women have developed ecotourism opportunities while generating income for their community schools, as well as contributing to healthcare and a community water project.
The money we get from this project directly go to the women's. First, we help other community, because this is the community project, so we have to help the other community. If there is a problem in the village, like Harambe in schools, we do donate, and if there is anything which can need to, so we have to help them, we do help the villagers.
This project has helped normalize women's involvement in local conservation activities by enhancing the sustainability of such efforts and recognizing women not just as passive project beneficiaries, but as active drivers of change for conservation and improved coastal livelihoods.
Thank you, Tanya, for giving us examples on how there is an undervaluing of the economic and societal benefits provided by women fishers, and that women fishers' catches provides the main source of protein for their own households. We will now have a panel discussion, and I would like to invite Sulen back to the stage. And we will have Tanya on screen, joining us live. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, everybody.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So, I would first like to start with a question to you, Sulen. We often hear that blue forests are some of the most valuable ecosystems that we have. What does that mean? Do we know exactly what they're worth?
Well, you heard it in many ways in Tanya's presentation, and I also talked a little bit about that. We call them some of the most valuable ecosystems that we have because they provide so many ecosystem services. But do we know what they're actually worth in terms of money? Unfortunately, no. And there are several reasons for that, but there have been a lot of valuation studies made, in particular for mangroves, which, like Tanya said, are the most studied blue forests in many ways. But most of these studies are in Asia, very few are in Africa. There are fewer valuation studies for seagrass, and even fewer still for salt marshes. And the ones that have been done for seagrass and salt marshes are in Europe or North America. So in terms of the developing world, we know fairly little. And the other thing is, there was a review article out about this a couple of years ago, and they explain how the valuation methods used aren't comparable and they aren't complete. Basically, what they often do is they price the ecosystem services that have a market price, like food. But recreation and many other things, like the livelihood issues, etc., are not valued in these studies. But last year, there was a new framework for ecosystem accounting that was approved in the UN system. And this is going to be really important moving forward, I think, because at a country level, it's extremely important that you put a value to the system so that you can make a business case for them, and that would help protect and conserve them. But there are some numbers out there, and they are large, but I would take them with a pinch of salt. I mean, for example, there is a number saying that every hectare of seagrass is worth $19,000, which sums up to, I don't know, I think about several $1 billion globally, of course. And McKinsey has come up with a number saying that mangroves are worth about $145 billion. And then in NIVA, we actually put a price to kelp, both in Norway, and we also operate with this number that kelp at a global scale is worth about 515 billion. But this number we know is underestimated for so many of the reasons that I just said. So a lot of research needs to be done, and I think that's really important for management purposes.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the next question to you, Tanya. When it comes to how do we normalize women's voice in integrated marine coastal management projects? I mean, what can the international development community actors do to help on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. I think, when I think about women and the women groups that we've worked with, I think they don't suffer maybe so much from a lack of empowerment, so much as a lack of visibility. And so maybe the question is about how do we make the invisible visible in the work that we do. And I think there's a lot of initiatives that the international communities can do, things like donors and development agencies. I think it's things like even just when proposals are coming out, listing women's groups in the list of stakeholders that we should be engaging with, having policy documents and having guidelines associated with funding calls that talk about how to engage with women's groups in socially appropriate ways, and ensuring that project development reporting, they have the right kinds of questions to ensure that they're not just tick boxes. We're not just saying how many women have we engaged with, but really giving projects an opportunity to talk about how they have engaged in kind of a more transformative way. And so I think that's a way to begin to normalize women's stakeholder groups and women's groups as just stakeholders that we engage with, like you would with fishermen and like other decision makers in these types of projects that we work with.
I just want to follow up a little bit, and I will come back to you, Solrun, again. Tanya, you do a lot of peer-to-peer learning and local capacity development to ensure long-lasting positive impact. So what would you say, would be sort of... I've heard you reflect on the reporting and so forth and the programming, but we also have a lot of focus on, integrated ocean and coastal management. And I'm thinking, how could this, and we're talking about inclusive processes, and you should include groups, women included, of course. But do you have any examples, anything you want to share with us in terms of how you do that in practice? Should you sort of go on a set of tools, or should you, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
I can try. I don't know that there's a set of tools. I think, it's as simple as, in some of the projects that we've developed, too late in the game did we ask about women's groups. We went in, we had case studies, and too late in the game did we go, oh, hey, do you have women's groups that are doing that? And the marine protected managers, they were like, well, yeah, of course we do, because there's often women's groups there. But nobody thought to bring that to the forefront. Nobody thought to bring them to the table from the beginning. So I don't know that it's a set of tools so much as this active engagement, this active knowledge that needs to be promoted by donors and by project developers that say, from the beginning, this is a group that needs to be included, just, as we would include fishermen's groups, as we would include other landowners and things like that. It just needs to become a group that is standardized, that we automatically talk with from the beginning.
Thank you, Tanya. Solrun, a question. I think it perhaps addresses both of you, but in your opinion, what is the preferred approach to sort of ensure sustainable management of blue forests? Solrun, please.
Very good and very difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because they're so complex and so different. But if you think about it, it really sort of comes down to what I have as a slogan, more or less: map, regulate, monitor. You need to map your forest. You need to know what you have and where you have it in order to be able to manage it. And then you need to sort of understand all the pressures that threaten those forests and regulate and manage all of those jointly in sort of an integrated manner. And we will hear more about this later in one of the other talks today, where we talk about ecosystem-based management. And then finally, you need to monitor. You need to see that everything you did it work? Did you have enough measures put in place? Or perhaps a climate change making this so much more difficult? So you need to really sort of track your progress, and you do that by monitoring. And it used to be quite sort of painstaking to map and monitor, because you would need to go perhaps in a boat or count your marshlands or use divers to figure out how much kelp you have, etc. But today there's actually a lot of progress made in technology. In EVA we have a CB drone that can sort of map this, and there's improvement in remote sensing as well. So that can be utilized easily all over the world as long as the technology is provided. But I also think there are two sort of words of caution that I would like to say, that given the complexity, you really need to bring a lot of different people together. And when we talk about blue forests, we talk about oceans, it's easy to forget that you need to perhaps include the Ministry of Agriculture because of the salt marshes. So you need to think in integrated and fairly broad manners. And a final word of caution, there's a lot of talk about marine protected areas, which are really important, but they have no effect if you don't manage the pressures. If pollution keeps going into a protected area, it's really no help. So this is really important.
So cross-sectoral cooperation,
Yes.
interagency cooperation, coordination.
Precisely. And you have these buzzwords out there like integrated ocean management, integrated coastal management. And you can call them all sorts of things, but what it comes down to, work together and manage this jointly. And I think it's really important in sort of terms of development aid is to really build on what's already in the country you're at, because they know what's needed, they know their systems, etc. So don't just export our methods, adapt them.
Thank you, Solrun. Tanya, would you like to add?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Solrun. I definitely agree with what you said. And I think even just to build on the integration, the last point that you made, I think that is so important to think about, organize ministries outside of Ministry of Fisheries, outside of the normal ministries of Environment. I would go even so as far as to include Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance as well in many of these countries, because they have an influence often greater than the Ministry of Environment does. And the issues that we're talking about are so cross-cutting. I mean, coastal health of ecosystems transfers so much to health of local people. And I think it's really important to recognize that and to try and integrate as many viewpoints as possible as we can going forward. I would also build on what Solrun said, that these are tools, right? And your last point that you made, that we need to understand the situation in the country that we're going into, because we have a variety of tools that are, integrated coastal management, integration ocean management. They're all tools, but they all need to be applied in the appropriate way depending on what is already existing in the country. And so I think that's important to really consider as we go into each country separately.
To follow up on that last point, Tanya, in countries you have both national management and you have municipality management. We can just see Norway, the model that is used here. That sort of makes it a little bit even more tricky in terms of coordination, cross-sectoral and also interagency-wise. So let's say if blue forests are sustainably managed, who will then, because there's always, a situation where somebody becomes winners and somebody perhaps becomes a bit losers in that sense. So I'm just trying to, do you have any last, reflection on if you see if you really have in an optimal situation, sustainable management, what would then be, who would sort of be the winners? Let's just keep it with the winners. Solrun, please.
If you have an optimal systems, everyone's a winner, right? But I mean, the management systems are different in different countries. So it depends on who's sort of responsible for the systems in many ways, who's assigned to manage the systems. Like in Norway, the coastline is the responsibility of the municipalities, but you have to go a little bit out into the ocean to sort of meet the responsibility of the state. And then they have to work together. Obviously, because otherwise there are conflicts. There are many, many, many interests in the coastal zone. So the only way forward really is cooperation, and they all need to work together. And it depends on the system. In Norway, there are guidelines given to the municipalities and to the sort of subnational levels. There are laws given that they have to follow, and they can work together like that. But really, the communities that are close to the systems know them best. And that's important to keep in mind.
Thank you. Tanya, would you like to add the last couple?
Yeah, I think the communities in my mind are need to be the winners because, as Solrun said, they're the ones that are impacted the most, at least in the countries that Grid Arundel works in most closely. There's the ones that are impacted in both a positive and negative way. I think other stakeholders that are using it, everyone's probably going to be a bit of a winner, but also probably going to have to give up something if we're going to sustainably manage. And it's just where that line is and what each stakeholder can tolerate. So I think that's always the balance that we're looking for in the work that we do.
Thank you very much, Solrun and Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I now have the pleasure of introducing Simon Funch-Smith. Simon is a senior fishery officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, at the Asia and Pacific Regional Office in Bangkok. So Simon has responsibility for coordinating FAO's regional program on fisheries and aquaculture, and his work covers the valuation and assessment of the role and importance of the regional capture fisheries and aquaculture. Simon has more than 30 years of experience working in Africa, in areas such as marine inland fisheries development, extensive and intensive aquaculture, and rural development and their associated livelihoods. Simon will give a pre-recorded talk on blue forests in Asia, recognizing their value and securing their benefits for coastal ecosystems and livelihoods. Let's listen to Simon.
I'd like to thank NORAD for giving FAO the opportunity to talk about blue forests in Asia and their linkages to fisheries and coastal livelihoods. Blue forests are found throughout Asia, in the tropical, subtropical and temperate coasts, and the largest resources are tropical seagrasses and mangroves, both of which have seen considerable declines in cover and integrity over the past 30 to 50 years, driven by agriculture, aquaculture, urban expansion, contact fishing on seagrass, and coastal pollution and degradation. Mangroves are quite resilient to the physical impacts of fishing, but seagrasses are particularly vulnerable to contact gears such as push nets. Are blue forests important for fisheries? They're assumed to be essential for sustaining fisheries as they provide habitat, nutrients, shelter, spawning and nursery areas. So if they're degraded or removed, it's assumed that that has significant impacts on fisheries, particularly commercial fisheries. The linkage is also used to add that value of commercial fisheries to overall blue forest evaluations, and also to argue for protection and restoration. But the linkage between blue forests and fisheries may not be as direct or as significant as we think. Scientifically proving this interdependence of fish and blue forests is extremely challenging, and some assumptions or extrapolations may be flawed. The presence of a species or life stage in a blue forest doesn't necessarily indicate dependence, and small island research extrapolated to continental settings may not be entirely valid or draw erroneous assumptions. And only some species are truly dependent, others use blue forests opportunistically. And finally, extrapolating nearshore blue forest status and linkage to fisheries into pelagic and offshore resources may not be justified in many cases. So what do we know about the linkages? Many species do use blue forests, but only some of them are truly dependent species. And some of these form commercial fisheries, shrimp in particular, and others form significant artisanal fisheries, such as fish and shellfish. And there are clear linkages between the loss of mangrove and decline in shrimp fisheries. However, when this was studied, the extent of the intertidal area rather than the area of mangrove tree cover seemed to be a more important factor for shrimp yield. Whatever the linkage between forests and commercial fisheries, there are still significant numbers of artisanal fishers' livelihoods that may be dependent on blue forests, particularly in the densely populated coastal areas of Southeast and South Asia. Blue forests still intensively are foraged and fished for food, but they also provide a host of other livelihood benefits such as fibres, charcoal, food, honey, and other non-aquatic resources. The important thing to consider is that there are linkages between blue forests and other components of coastal ecosystems. Blue forests form an integral part of a more complex, interrelated matrix of habitats in coastal waters. And if they degrade, there are linkages to the other components. And this may, but not always, have a knock-on effect to fisheries. Restoring or protecting blue forests, however, does not address the impacts of overfishing. Having healthy seagrass, mangrove and seaweed does not equal a healthy fishery, particularly if that fishery is poorly managed. But that's certainly still part of the broader solution. Seaweed farming is a new or an emerging type of blue forest. It's not really a natural blue forest, but more like a blue plantation. And the vast majority of seaweed production in Asia is farmed, over 34.5 million tons in Asia and the Pacific in 2019. And many livelihoods in Asia are linked to seaweed farming. It has a long history as a use as food, and more recently as phycocolloids, agar gels, in the food production industry, but also in a host of other industrial applications like paint, toothpaste, fibres, etc. And there's also increasing interest in their role as nutraceuticals and also their potential long-term as biomass for fuel. But some caution about the potential of farmed seaweed. It's often touted as a solution for livelihoods in coastal areas, but this may ignore the current realities. The majority of seaweed farming is labour intensive, and farmers face uncertainty and vulnerability. It's a tough life with poor remuneration, and there are fluctuating prices, disease, cyclones and damage, which all contribute to making this a livelihood that is not always as resilient or even as attractive as people like to think it is. But there is still potential, and also the industrial scale of seaweed farming has not yet emerged as a reality in the region. This is mainly due to the challenges that I've just mentioned and the economic viability of large-scale offshore structures. But a lot of this is going to change if seaweed starts to become a viable alternative for fuel, biomass or carbohydrate feedstock. So the main messages of this presentation are that conserving components of the coastal ecosystem will generate increased and more sustainable benefits in the blue economy, and that connectivity of mangroves, seagrasses, coral reefs, mudflats, sandflats and rocky reefs significantly enhances their ecological or functional value as fisheries habitats. And that even if blue forests cannot be linked to large-scale commercial fisheries, they still have important intrinsic value for coastal livelihoods, biodiversity and system function. And finally, seaweed has a future, but how it's going to expand and who actually gets to play in that game is still a big question for the future. So with that, I thank you all very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Simon, highlighting linkages between blue forests and fisheries, sharing concerns regarding seaweed farming, and showcasing the present uncertainty on how distribution of income will be in this growing market. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ian Bryson. Ian is here physically, but he's going to have a pre-recorded presentation, so you can just sit and relax for a couple of minutes. Ian is a marine ecologist. He's a citizen of Tanzania and Ireland, living in Norway. He is retired but continues teaching and supervision with a Professor Emeritus position at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. He's currently engaged in projects in Tanzania, Mozambique, and Indonesia, together with Oslo Met and universities of Tromsø and Bergen. Ian will give a talk on sustainability factors in tropical seaweed cultivation. Let's listen to Ian's message.
Thank you so much to NORAD and the Norwegian Blue Forest Network for inviting me to speak to you about sustainability factors in tropical seaweed cultivation. As a point of departure, it's important to realize that seaweed production is the largest form of aquaculture in the world, far outstripping in size any fish production or other types of aquaculture. The number one species is kelp, or saccharina, a brown seaweed produced almost entirely in China for the production of alginate. Formerly number one, but now number two, is euchema, which is a tropical red seaweed for producing carrageenan. Capophycus is another tropical red seaweed, very similar to euchema. This is a piece of euchema in clear tropical seawater where it thrives. The production of euchema has risen very rapidly up to 10 million tons in 2015 and then stagnated slightly due to low price. By far the largest producer is Indonesia, with Zanzibar as number two. Capophycus is quite similar, but has a thicker thallus. Capophycus is mainly produced in the Philippines and Malaysia. Production rose rapidly to 2 million tons in 2011-12, and then it also fell off slightly due to prices. Euchema is processed to produce iota carrageenan, a weak gel, while Kappa ficus produces kappa carrageenan, a stronger gel. These gels are polysaccharide hydrocolloids of high value used in foods, animal feeds, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics. Eucheuma and Kappa ficus are algae, and their aquaculture production is characterized by multiple ecological advantages of low trophic level systems. In fact, 11.5 million tons per year contributes hugely to carbon sequestration as a significant climate factor. The culture of these red seaweeds requires clean, warm seawater. The production system involves no feeding, no chemicals, no medication, and no wastes. They grow at an impressive rate of 6 to 12% per day and can be harvested fortnightly. They may be grazed upon by various marine organisms, but this is rarely considered a problem. They are vulnerable to pollution, such as herbicides and industrial chemicals, and the stress can cause bleaching and proneness to diseases and epiphytes. In 2003, I had a sabbatical year with Norwegian Research Council funding to study aquaculture systems in Tanzania, Malaysia, and Norway. I was very fortunate to be taught by the seaweed farmers of Zanzibar, here by Gina Heri of Paje village. Gina agreed to explain the system to me if I would help to carry a heavy sack of wet harvested seaweed back to the village with her. Gina showed how the seaweed is dried on mats in the sun until it becomes dry to about 1/10 of its weight, ready to be sold to traders who then sell it to a foreign company for export. When seaweed farming was first introduced to Zanzibar in 1989, prices were quite good and represented an important income, especially for women who were the majority of the farmers. It was also a source of foreign exchange for Zanzibar. In later years, the prices were lowered by the foreign company who controlled the global market, and farmers became dissatisfied. I found that, meanwhile, the world price of carrageen was actually increasing, and the foreign company boasting of super profits to their shareholders. This histogram shows the prices paid to farmers in Zanzibar, starting at 32 cents per kilo and then falling to 6 cents in 2000. In 2011 to 2014, Chinese traders offered better prices, but they later left for the Southeast Asian markets. Meanwhile, prices in the Philippines were increasing. I was informed that the producers there sold their seaweed to local processors who added value to the carrageenan and paid the farmers better than the foreign companies did. In Paje village, a group of seaweed farmers with Gina in the center were very interested in these findings, and I gave them printouts of the graphs. The government of Zanzibar were also interested and organized a meeting of officials, local traders, researchers, a representative of FMC, the foreign company exporter, and the farmers. The FMC representative told them all that he would not be able to raise the prices. The farmers were seated in the back row, not at the table, and were hardly allowed to speak. They were not pleased. This text is a direct quote, word for word, from a book published by Eric Usk, the CEO of FMC Biopolymers, for the traders who buy seaweed for him from the villagers. Usk is apparently delighted by villagers having no livelihood options, by dire conditions so that they will be dependent on FMC. This is an absolutely shockingly exploitative and oppressive attitude. In 2003, I also visited Sabah in eastern Malaysia. Abdurrahman Jualali was the leader of a big seaweed cooperative, and he was at first very skeptical to me because he thought I was an FMC representative. However, we had a very positive conversation and he became very friendly. In fact, we are friends until today. Abdurrahman explained the production system to me, and I was invited to stay with the villagers there. They operate from boats, and both men and women are involved in production. I am fortunate to currently be involved in a project on sustainable marine aquaculture development in Indonesia, together with the University of Tromsø, funded by the Norwegian Embassy in Indonesia. The Indonesians are the second greatest aquaculture producers in the world after China, and there is very much to learn from them. In 2005, I visited China and was enormously impressed by the vast marine aquaculture production there. Here, in Changgu Bay in Shandong, they farm large areas of the Yellow Sea to produce kelp, currently over 12 million tons per year. But what is even more impressive is the fact that this is an integrated multi-trophic aquaculture system in which different species of different trophic levels are produced together. Between the large blades of kelp, there are baskets of oysters. The kelp consumes carbon dioxide and produces oxygen, while the oysters do the opposite, consuming oxygen and producing carbon dioxide. They also exude nitrogen and phosphorus needed by the kelp. Particulate wastes from the kelp and oysters sink to the bottom, where sea cucumbers consume these and constitute an additional product of the system. Gabriella and I visited this area in 2018 to review a collaboration with the Institute of Marine Sciences in Bergen. In the last 20 years, Gina Heri has kindly assisted several of my master's students with their field research on seaweed farming. Finally, though, Gina left seaweed farming to work as a cleaner in a tourist hotel, which gives her slightly higher income. We keep in contact and we visited her in 2019 with a group of students. I also keep in contact with Abdurrahman and many other aquaculturists around the world. Here in 2017, Abdurrahman and I are older and fatter. He still tells me interesting information about seaweed farming developments in Sabah. To try to summarize a large and complex topic in a few simple terms, I attempt here to juxtaposition what I consider to be negative versus positive choices. Blue is a popular catchword nowadays, but blue can be both good or bad. There are usually winners and losers, with the rich and powerful often squeezing out the poor and marginalized. There are social, political, economic, cultural and legal aspects to this. Neocolonialism and grabbing, for example, are highly problematic for the livelihoods and rights of millions of people like Gina and Abdurrahman. Ecological aspects are also key to sustainability, where in aquaculture production of luxury species of high trophic levels for rich people are usually problematic for biodiversity, ecosystem integrity, climate and sustainability. When you consider blue forest interventions and investments for development, either for tropical seaweeds or for mangroves, coral reefs or seagrasses, please always remember the livelihoods and rights of people like Gina Heri. Gina Heri and people like her are experts who should be centrally involved in designing and implementing development projects. Gina does not need charity. She needs respect for her rights and fair trade. Asante, terima kasih, sheshe, tusen tack.
Thank you, Ian, for sending a clear message describing the risks when making blue choices, which does not necessarily mean sustainable choices. Before we start, I would like now to introduce Dag Hessen, who will join us in the discussion. Dag is a professor in biosciences at University of Oslo and head of the Center for Biogeochemistry in the Anthropocene, dealing with climate and carbon cycling in northern ecosystems. He is also author of several recognized science books. So welcome to the stage, Dag and Ian, please. To start off our discussion, I would like to ask a question to both of you, and perhaps Dag can start. It's about the degradation of land and its nature, the importance to preserve what remains, puts pressure on oceans and coastal zones in many ways. So if now everybody is looking to the sea to produce more food, will there be room for all this activity in these sea areas where such activities are possible?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't be naive here, and for good reasons, as Ian just presented. There are good and bad sides of the blue economy, and it could be blue washing, not only greenwashing, of course, going on. But I think the basic point is that the land surface is used up, actually it's overused, so there is nowhere to go to produce more food from terrestrial ecosystems. Also, we will likely run short in phosphorus in, well, some decades or at most centuries, which is, of course, instrumental to keep up the land-based production. So that's one of the reasons why we really have to turn into the seas, not only for carbon sequestration, but for food production. And not only the shore side, but also the open oceans. So we haven't talked much about the phytoplankton here, which is another key source for energy and for biomaterials, biofuels, and of course food, then of course of immense importance for carbon sequestration. But I think also we need to realize that we need to harvest from the unknowns. I mean, I used to say that the most important animal in Norway is not the sheep, not the cow, not even the salmon or the cod. It's a small, tiny crustacean called Colonus finmarchicus, which are there in billions of tons, and do this job of eating phytoplankton and transporting it to higher trophic levels. But it's also is an ideal food source for humans themselves. I mean, it's in some way ridiculous that this very small shrimp-like animal is used for feeding food to fish rather than for humans. But again, it is a very good example that we need to harvest also the pelagic resources like the littoral in a sustainable way. And yeah, that's something we can come back to. But clearly, the land is used up, so we need to turn into the marine systems.
Ian, would you like to add?
Yeah, well, I'll try to disagree with my old friend because it makes it more interesting. I think you're right, basically, but the land can be used better. And we can recycle, for example, phosphorus much better. What we are doing now is the sewage and wastes are going into the sea instead of being recycled into fertilizers on land. And I think that a lot of the sustainability issues, the worst problems are in the rich north countries. And there's overconsumption and huge waste and pollution here. So I think there's a massive potential for much more sustainable production on land. But I also agree that the sea does offer enormous potential. I actually did my PhD on the phytoplankton of the coastal waters of Tanzania about 100 years ago. And so I love to come back to phytoplankton. And when I came to Norway, first to University of Oslo and was there with you, I actually worked on the phytoplankton in the Oslo fjord because there's a problem of eutrophication and toxic dinoflagellates are growing. So it's a sort of different problem. So, but they are by far the most abundant living organisms on the planet. And they are very, very tiny, so it's extremely difficult to use them. But I think with research and technology increases, that there is huge potential there. In addition, for example, in the sea, there are mesopelagic fish, vast resources which are untouched until now, which are not very tasty, but could be a very good source of protein and essential fatty acids. So I think there's huge potential, but I think that we also need to not only want to expand and use more resources, but to use the resources that we are already using much better, and recycling wastes and cutting down on pollution, not only plastic pollution, but I was working in the 80s in a United Nations body called GESAM, Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Assessment of Marine Pollution, for several years. And I felt very proud because I was representing the Indian Ocean. Can you imagine a young fellow? But what I was telling them, they had all these acronyms for all these pollutants, TBTs and a long list of them, and heavy metals. And I was thinking, and then I had to try to sound a little bit sophisticated. So I said, actually, in the Indian Ocean, the main pollutant problem is SHIT. And they took a moment to realize what I'd said, but it's just basically sewage. And so I think there's an awful lot of work that can be done to improve and to increase the sustainability of very unsustainable.
To just follow up on that a little bit, we do have, I see 5 minutes left, so that's good. If there's an expansion, and you've been touching upon that a lot, and also in your presentation, Ian, but how do we see the whole situation of land, rights to people? Land rights, if you see the terrestrial part, how to work on development, trying to increase the yields and so forth. And now we see a lot of challenges in terms of land rights. So how do you see that for a coastal population if we now are going to increase the productivity and so forth?
Just to start, I completely agree with Diane's points. Of course, it's very important, and much we can do with recycling and the whole way we use resources and do not recycle them. And of course, a good argument for marine systems is also the fatty acids, as you mentioned, and also because they are much more efficient food chains. So there are many good reasons for that. But yeah, of course, the point with harvesting from not only marine sources, but all kinds of resources is the potential for the tragedy of the commons. So that is an argument for that there should be kind of local ownership to the resources, and it should be strictly regulated to avoid the pitfalls that we have seen in fisheries, and also, for instance, failures we did with the scallops trawling some years ago. So we should, of course, learn from these lessons, whether we harvest from fish, kelps, or zooplankton. But when it comes to genetic resources, I think that's a different issue. And of course, bioprospecting is also a very important issue. And the way this is done in the Norwegian Act of Biodiversity is that, of course, the stocks and population and harvesting of those are regulated locally or nationally. But when it comes to genetic resources, at least from the Norwegian perspective, this is seen as a common good for societies. You can actually come to Norway, find a valuable gene resource or protein, and go back to your own country and use this for the good of humanity. I think that's a good thought, but the practice is and should be different, I think, between Western countries and Southern countries or developing countries.
Ian, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the tragedy of commons theory. I think that there's so much common property that it's not open access in there. But the sea sometimes is. But I think that even with the law of the sea and the FAO's efforts and regional fisheries bodies, one is actually trying to manage resources collectively in better ways. So I'm a little bit optimistic on that. But what I'm more pessimistic about is the tragedy of blue grabbing and green grabbing, and the evictions of people from their traditional resources. For example, very good intentions to put forward marine conservation, marine protected areas is sometimes done in a way where people are evicted. And that is not sustainable, because it will not have legitimacy or credibility, and it can only work properly if the local populations are also involved in this. So I think that there are much better ways than the current practice on these sorts of things.
A final comment on that, the way to overcome the tragedy of the common is also, or frequently, that there is a kind of local community that, of course, see the negative results of overharvesting, etc. That was Elinor Ostrom in her time won the Nobel Prize for recognizing that actually you can overcome the tragedy of the common if it's local people that deal with resources.
Thank you. So we have time for one last question. Ian, in your presentation, you talk about blue choices not always being the right ones. From the list on your presentation, which 3 choices do you think partner countries and international development partners should choose in order for it to be sustainable blue choices moving forward?
I was being a little bit rhetorical to try to juxtaposition and show the contrasts between what I consider to be the positive and the negative choices. I think it's very difficult to choose 3, I'm sorry, but I think that basically I divide them to 2 categories: the more social, which includes economic, political, cultural, and so on. And there, I think the ones that I mentioned was blue neocolonialism. I think that much more inclusive and fair approaches must be made and against blue grabbing. And then on the ecological, I mean, I think that I'm agreeing very much with what Doug is saying, is that ecosystem approach, balanced harvest, and long-term sustainability as the focus. So I don't think I've answered you very well, but that's basically what I would think.
You actually have answered me very well. Thank you, Ian. Thank you both very much for contributing to this discussion and sharing your reflections and knowledge on these very important topics. And thanks to all the participants. So thank you and applaud for Dag and Ian. Very good, thank you. We will now have a coffee break and we will be back at 10:30. So thank you to all participants so far. So see you, be right back.